Hello everybody and welcome to this Royal College of Surgeons of England webinar tonight on managing wellbeing and burnout in the surgical team. My name's Farah Bhatti, I'm a cardiac surgeon and I'm really privileged to be on Council of the Royal College of Surgeons. We've got two excellent speakers this evening speaking on a topic that is very pertinent to a number of issues that are going in and we're all facing at the moment. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who's Mr. Uttam Shiralkar. He's in a unique position because he's both a consultant surgeon and a psychiatrist, and he works now in surgical performance coaching and mentoring. I'll go on to introduce our second speaker shortly. So over to you, Uttam. I think you're muted.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Farah, for the introduction, and I would like to thank college for inviting me to participate in this very important topic. So I'll be focusing to begin with mostly on the burnout because that is a specific entity and which is very significant, serious, and the management of general well-being would be covered as a part of that. So next slide, please. So we're going to discuss about the cognitive applications or cognitive techniques that can be used. Sorry, can you go back to the first slide, please? The previous one. So the first step regarding managing this well-being and burnout is to understand what exactly is the problem and what is the need. Why should we bother about this? So it is not just about the mental well-being of the surgeon himself or herself. It is about the consequences that are seen in a clinical professional life. People who are having stress or problems or burnout especially are known to have higher error rates, and ultimately the patient satisfaction is reflected in the surgeon's well-being and burnout. So that's why it is very, very serious and very clinically as well as for the workforce, it is a very important topic. Next slide, please. Right, so let's understand what exactly the burnout is. It is a specific entity studied for last few decades in various professionals, including among surgeons as well. So on right-hand side, you can see the common utterances or expressions that people use when they're suffering from burnout. And on the left side, there are three cardinal features of burnout. The first one is exhaustion. The exhaustion is both physical as well as mental. You just feel tired at the end of the day when you come home. You feel relieved that the workday is over. So that is about the exhaustion. And again, I repeat, it is not just physical, it is mental as well. Secondly, and which is ongoing, it is feeling lack of achievement. I've seen quite a few surgeons at various grades. Although they have been doing reasonably well in their career, they feel as if they haven't done much. They have done nothing to that extent. So that is the second important feature. And the third one is the most important, most significant, and which is not usually perceived by us, which is called as depersonalization. It may appear to be jargon term, but what it is about feeling cynical about everything. And more importantly, in clinical sense, it is the compassion fatigue. Now, in medical practice, surgical practice, compassion is the utmost, it is the core of our surgical practice, of our clinical life. And when we start losing compassion for others, for patients, for colleagues, for the staff, that's where the compassion fatigues are, and it is a very, very cardinal symptoms. So the utterances that we hear from surgeons or people who are suffering or have been staging, have started to experience these symptoms are on the right side, that I'm not sure how long I will go on. I don't understand why I'm feeling that I haven't achieved anything, although I'm working hard and harder and harder. So these are the kind of features. If you hear from now on somebody saying, you should raise an antenna and start exploring whether it is a serious enough. Next slide, please. So at this stage, I mentioned what burnout is. At this stage, I would like to also clarify what it is not. And usually people confuse with stress and burnout, stress and burnout and depression. So let me clarify the concepts a little bit more because the management differs between these two. So first, about between stress and burnout. So the first, stress is because of the over engagement of the individual. You are involved in too many things. In case of burnout, it is usually people start withdrawing or they have already withdrawn from the activities. In stress, there are emotional overreactions. You must have seen in theaters what happens when there's a stressful situation. We are agitated and we are quite hyperactive, which is not the case in case of burnout. There is emotional blunting. There isn't appropriate reaction from an individual who is experiencing burnout. And there is also behavioral underactivity in burnout as opposed to stress when there is behavioral hyperactivity. You try to do too many things, you try to resolve the situation by doing too many things which you feel will address the problem, which ultimately it doesn't, unfortunately. And if these two situations keep on following, and if it keeps on lingering, the stress causes more of a anxiety symptoms, while burnout causes more of a depressive symptom. So this is just a broad differentiation, just to understand yourself what exactly either your colleague or you yourself might be experiencing. Next one, please. Then we have to differentiate between burnout and depression. Although they are interrelated, extreme burnout may cause someone feel depressed. It happens the other way around. Someone may be having depressive symptoms which end up into burnout. So at the same time, we need to have some different ideas what exactly it is. So the first thing, burnout is specifically related to work, while depression may be various other things. It may be something has happened in your personal life. It may be a phase. So depression could be from various reasons, while if your symptoms, if the feelings, if the problem is related to work, it is likely to be burnout. In case of burnout, you consume, as I mentioned previously, that you put in a lot of hard work, but you don't feel any returns. In case of depression, you just don't feel like putting any efforts. And you may get a feedback from your colleagues, from your mentors, trainers, that you are not putting in enough efforts, or your line manager for that matter. And one of the most important biological feature is burnout is the feelings of burnout are worse in the evening, where in case of depression, it is worse in the morning. So if when you're heading towards work, if you feel that, oh my God, I mean, it is better not to go to work, it is again a signal that it is something more than just burnout. But when you're going to work, you feel okay, but it is the problem when you're coming back from work, it is work related. Next slide, please. So this is about the picture that you can see day to day. But as far as the long-term course is concerned, these are the two things that we see in our sort of practice. Either someone, you take a job, you become a consultant, and within few months, you start getting sort of losing your interest. And this is on the left side, that it just goes on over the months or years, the reduction in your performance, your feeling, and you become chronically kind of burnt out. That is one feature. But the second is more worrying, that we have seen people who climb up to the ladder of the career or the work. They're doing sort of fantastic job in their life, in their work, but suddenly something goes wrong and there is a tipping point and things go downhill. And these are the kind of people that we may be reading seeing in the news as well, that someone who was at the top of their career and something he or she did wrong, and this could be one of the features. So in certain cases, and I've seen this in my personal sort of practice as well, it is the usually start of the burnout process or some psychological problem. That is the reason, that is the index factor that starts that downhill. So we need to be careful about this. Next slide, please. Now here again, I mean, it is a general perception, and which is not too wrong, but again, there is some other side. We always compare that work-life balance and burnout. Yes, there is a role of work-life balance, but it is not directly related to work-life balance, and that's what this slide is for. This was a study presented, and if you see these four squares, the yellow square, and on the x-axis, there is a satisfaction of work life, and on the y-axis, it is a percentage of burnout. If it would have been related directly to the work-life balance, it should be different sort of scenario. But if you can see on these, the top yellow, there are specialties where there is a good work-life balance, but there is still high proportion of burnout. And on the other hand, the low yellow square, you see the less proportion of burnout, although the work-life balance is not that satisfactory. So there are far more different factors that causes burnout than just work-life balance. And we are going to see what those factors are. Next slide, please. So what causes burnout? The first thing, practice of medicine, that itself. Now, the concept of burnout came from professionals who are involved in caring for others, where empathy is the core feature of any profession. It started actually with social workers, where they're found to be burnt out. So practice of medicine requires empathy, and any faculty, any specialty which involves empathy as a career, it causes burnout. I think most of us have felt any time in our many sort of, if you consider lifetime prevalence of burnout, it could be said more than 90%. Most of us feel sometime in our career, oh, it's too much. I'm unable to carry out. But most of us are able to pass that phase. We learn from that stage. It is a passing phase in our career. Most of us so far have been able to manage, deal with that stage and carry on and progress in our career. But things have changed now, lately. And there is a reason why things have changed, why burnout has become more prominent than before. Now, as a surgeon, we are all used to take risks, take responsibilities, and doing a stressful job. So that has been the demand. At the same time, in past, we used to have control in our lives. The number of cases that we used to do, the way we used to conduct our professional life, we used to have far more control. And the main reason why this burnout is more of a problem with surgeons is that surgeons as a personality, as a professional group, we thrive on control. We are keen to take risks provided we have the control. What has happened lately is the mismatch between control and demand. We are put on, we're exposed to, we're demanded to take more risk, more responsibility. Proportionally, we have lesser control for various reasons. I mean, there are a number of reasons for that, but that is a fact. Why the number of surgeons are getting more burnt out, and why the situation is not going to be addressed just by doing one small thing or superficial thing, is this: that there is a shift in paradigm, there is a shift in social, managerial, organizational structure, and there is a less control, more demand. That is the core problem. Also, there is an individual factor, not everybody. I'm going to make one interesting sort of point. You know, in the UK, whenever this question of burnout starts, everybody starts blaming NHS, what the NHS is. Just one fact: the percentage of burnout, all the different countries among doctors, is more or less same, 30%. So in this country, we blame NHS. In US, they complain sort of their own health system. Even in countries like Saudi Arabia, China, there have been burnout among doctors and surgeons. So it is the issue of the current, it is a societal problem, not just a country, not just any organization. So although there are various organizations, the main thing is the variability among the personality, and that is the sort of index, and that is the thing that we as a surgeons can make efforts to change, to modulate. So there are personalities who are more vulnerable for suffering from burnout. which are kind of workaholic, perfectionist surgeons. And it is a sad thing. The surgeons who are able to devote more, able to offer more for the organization, are more susceptible for burnout. Next slide, please. So this is the kind of interrelation, things that happen in the work, something that happens in our life, and some things that are there in our personality. So it is interrelated. It is not just work. It is not just lifestyle. It is not just personality. It is a combination of all three factors that need to be borne in mind. Next slide, please. So what is the personality? As I mentioned, there are perfectionist tendencies. And at the same time, some people, you might have come across these people, this may have pessimistic view about the self as well as world, and also they need to be in control. And they find it difficult to delegate things to others. And also, sadly, high achieving type A personality, I'm sure you must be thinking about individuals that you may have seen in your life who have been very active, proactive, very sort of reaching high goals in the career, and suddenly something happens and they just lose interest. So this is about personality. Next slide, please. So what is the issue about work? Again, the main theme is more responsibility, more risk, less control. If they're undue, overly demanding job, and in the picture you can show that what happens in burnout, that you keep on working on an empty battery or low level of battery. That's what the situation in burnout is. Ideally, I mean, although you may feel that you need to give 100% in your work, where you want to be fully charged, but you keep on working on an empty battery for a long time, and that happens the further accentuation of burnout. People say partly it is true and partly it is perpetuated because of the burnout, that they have been doing so much, but they are not getting rewarded or not getting recognized or appreciated. And there is a chronic high pressure at work. And this is the case in case of A&E doctors. Although there is a good work-life balance, if there is a lot of demand, uncertainty in the way they work, the chances of burnout is quite high. Next slide, please. And then lifestyle. One important thing I will mention about lifestyle, and I would like to clarify the concept about relaxation and taking time off from the work, is that it does help taking time off from the work. Even I've seen people taking sabbatical. Does it work? Not necessarily. Taking time off is one thing. It is like if you have a pain, giving rest to the limb reduces the symptom, but when you start moving the limb again, the pain may recur. It is the same thing with burnout. So just by taking rest may not work for everybody. What you need is the active recharge. As I mentioned in that previous slide, working or suffering from burnout while working is like working on a less sort of lower battery. You need to recharge the battery. When you just take a rest or during the weekend, if you don't do anything, that's fine. I mean, but that may not necessarily recharge your battery. For recharge, you need to do something active, like something that gives you pleasure. When you increase the sort of, in pop psychology term, when you increase the adrenaline, morphine in your body, that's the recharge. So you need to do something actively that increase your level of happiness, that gives you sort of morale boost. That is the thing. Just by staying away from the work, and I repeat, I've seen people taking sabbatical, taking 1 year away from the work. They feel fine as long as they're away from the work, but when they come back, the symptoms resume. Why? Because they haven't tried actively to recharge their batteries. And we'll see next what that recharge requires. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, go back. Yeah. If there is any slide, if there is anything, at least one thing that would be the take-home message from this webinar, it would be this slide. So this is a kind of burnout management, or we can say burnout prevention matrix. And what does it say? It says that there are four factors, that 4 domains that you need to, or we as a team or as an organization need to address. On the there are 2 ways to reduce it, and 2 sort of areas that we can do. 2 things that we need to do is reduce the stress and increase in the recharge, increase in the positive feelings. And it can be done on 2 lines. One is individual as well as organization. So you can decide to reduce the stress by individual decision, by like changing the work. If the things that are causing you stressful, you can prioritize we can sort of find out which are the things that are causing you stress most. You can reduce them. At the same time, you need to increase in recharge, do something pleasurable. For example, there are people who like to involve more in research, but because of the clinical commitments or because the things have developed, they are unable to devote that much time. So in that case, I would suggest reduce the clinical work, increase more of a research commitment. So that are the ways that you can do in your individual capacity. Same is for organization. Organization can do something to reduce, and this is where the manager, line manager, clinical directors, or at higher level people can take consideration that rescheduling the work commitments, giving more SPAs or something, discussing with the respective surgeon, it can be done, or the surgeon himself or herself can approach the line manager or clinical director to consider which would be helpful for both organization as well as for the surgeon. And the other thing is increasing the recharge. Again, organization can suggest what kind of, they can explore for particular surgeon what he or she would be interested. And even the line manager, clinical directors do get a feeling after interacting with that particular surgeon that what is it that would be available in the current organization or current setup where this particular surgeon would find it, would enjoy it. So these 4 domains need to be considered. Now, how to approach them? Either they can be approached longitudinally, one after another, depending on the circumstances, or all 4 can be considered at the same time. Again, whatever the availability. The practical thing is what I have observed. When someone is not having optimum mental well-being or suffering from burnout, the relationship with the line manager is affected, and in fact that becomes a vicious circle. And this is important for both, for the individual surgeon as well as for the line manager, that when the problems, it has been reported or you have been made aware that someone is not functioning, just consider this factor, whether there are underlying issues like burnout, they have just started, that may be the problem. So it is a very important factor to remember that when someone is asking you for the change on circumstances, work requirements, just consider few questions might just give you some indication that that may be the issue. So this is the one of the, it is a kind of template for managing the work burnout or any stress for that matter, or any kind of mental well-being problem from individual as well as organization point of view. Next slide, please. Farah, do I have time to discuss on those, or have I exceeded the time?
No, you're doing great. I'm looking forward to hearing the end of the talk.
Okay. Right. So, what can be done about work? So, the first thing is, if work is the main problem, and it is, but again, as I mentioned, there are personal, lifestyle, individual factors, and work. If you feel that work is a significant factor, and if you decide to change the work circumstances, the first is reframe the work perspective. Now, when we work, it is said that we have got 2 motivations. One is internal motivation, another is external motivation. External motivation is the money that we get by working, the recognition that we get. Internal work is that you work for your own satisfaction. You get the job satisfaction just by working in this field. So you have to balance which is more for you and which is causing the problem. Ironically, what I've seen is that ideally it is said that the more internal motivation you have, you will perform better. Yes, it's true, but sometimes not considering the external motivators or not giving them due credit might cause the problem. I've seen that people who have got very clear-cut idea that I want this much amount of money, or they sometimes are able to manage the burnout better. Again, it is not a sweeping statement. One may just need to consider that if they're too idealist, if they are too much kind of striving for achieving a success which is very difficult, very diffuse, and just it is for their own internal satisfaction. Because if they're expecting something too high, something too broad, too vague, it might just be the factor. So sometimes balancing or giving more balance for the external factors, having a target, objective target, might be helpful. So giving the sort of a sort of challenge to the work perspective might be better. Exploring counterbalance in life. Again, sometimes just rather than taking sabbatical, taking a long leave, just balancing the work and life balance. I know that I showed the slide earlier in a different perspective, but giving it a consideration is the basic thing sometimes happens. Other very practical, and sometimes people just take it very trivially, but making friends and work, it seems very simple, very basic, but I have seen it working very, very significantly. And when I say making friends at work, not just casual friends that you can go on partying or have a pint of beer, it is something deeper that you can share your considerations, your thoughts. That's what I meant making friends with sort of acquaintances, work friends, it's okay. But when I say making friends, it is much deeper relationship that I mean. And I mentioned before that active recharge is far more important. Next slide, please. Again, as I said, reevaluate priorities. It is a very common issue that people just don't want to say no, especially in the early stage of a career, that you keep on jumping on every opportunity that you get, thinking that, oh, I may not get it next. But again, you have to balance. Even taking time off from your sort of mobile or computer, that's such a simple thing. It does help. Simple things significantly help. This is my personal experience. Again, I will keep on repeating, set aside active pleasure time. That is the most important thing. Again, if there is a very simple advice, set aside active pleasure time. Whatever you find pleasure, just spending your time with family or either I said doing research, even the work. It's not that you have to be away from work. There may be some domains in your workplace where you will find active pleasure. Again, creating friends for that sense is very important. Next slide, please. And I've seen there is typical surgeon's personality, and there are surgeons who would like to deal most of the things by themselves, but there are other surgeons who are very receptive to interpersonal approach, and there is a need of cultural change in surgery. And I've seen that surgeons seeking help, support, and because the way culture is, because the way surgeons stereotypical personality is, they don't receive support or interaction, and that need to be changed. And it is not just organizational responsibility, it is not just individual responsibility, is the responsibility of the surgical culture at large. And that's why I think I'm taking this opportunity to make everyone aware of that there is a need for that. And if for some reasons the culture of your department, of your group is such that it is difficult, you have to explore other avenues, find out friends of some community or group, others, and find new friends. There is, although you may be at a sort of later part of your career, past 50s or 60s, it's never late, even for making new friends. Next slide, please. And this is, I'm going to make you aware that there is a slight difference between how female surgeons experience burnout, what are the differences between male and female presentation. Even the symptoms, there are differences. The most prominent feature among female surgeons is exhaustion, both mental and physical. In case of male, it is more of a cynicism, sarcasm, and compassion fatigue. That is the most common found in surgeons. And in women, the cynicism is second most common, while in case of male, it is the exhaustion that is second most common. It is interesting that the way female surgeons and male surgeons deal with this on their own. Female surgeon is seen that they seek support relatively early. That's the nature. And in my personal experience, what I've seen that it is the male surgeons who suffer from burnout have got more symptoms, or they suffer more than female surgeons. And I think this is a very advantageous for women surgeons, because the way the nature is, or the way they process the information, they seek support relatively early. They share with their colleagues far better, and they share with their family members in a better way as well, and they're more receptive for the advice. So overall, I must say, in my personal limited experience, I would say that I've seen female surgeons. There are other issues that are that do affect female surgeons more, but as far as pure burnout is concerned and the dealing is concerned, I have seen female surgeons dealing it very early, and I've seen them preventing going to a next stage, which again is a case for male surgeons to be aware of. Next slide, please. And I would like to end my presentation by mentioning this slide. We have seen this mind the gap. Mind the gap. What gap? Gap is about having enjoyable career throughout your career span and not enjoying your career some part of your life. So that is the gap, and it can be closed by being aware of these cognitive factors. Minding the gap is the sort of minding the mental well-being factors and burnout and how to prevent it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shirelka. That was a fascinating talk. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, but we need to move on. But it's been fascinating, and I'll remember your burnout matrix. I'm going to hand over now to Professor Tan Arulampalam, who's a consultant surgeon and is interested in an expert in human factors and non-technical skills, which I'm sure you're all aware that we need more of. So over to you, Tan.
Thanks very much, Farah, and thank you for the invitation. I've made a video. Uttam has really set the scene, and I have reinforced some of what he has said and given a bit more of my lived experience as well. So I think let's play the video. There's a little short gap and then it'll start. Hello, thank you for inviting me to talk about wellness and burnout. My name is Tan Arulampalam. I've done a little bit of work on this. It's not easy. Living your best life is tough, and we know that the demands of medicine and surgery in particular are brutal. They involve self-sacrifice and huge challenges. So it's complex, it needs education, and it needs a lot of work. And I always come back to this quote of René Lariche in Henry Marsh's book, Do No Harm. Every surgeon carries within himself a small cemetery where he goes to from time to pray, a place of bitterness and regret, where he must look for an explanation of his failures. And it is really important that we acknowledge that this is what we're talking about. So the plan is to look at the why, the challenges of COVID-19, which have really changed the dynamic a little bit, perhaps highlighted what was always going on. We'll look at burnout. I think it's an overused phrase, and I think it's important that we realise how we can mitigate and deliver our best selves to our patients. So the road ahead really is about psychological safety, civility. I can't stress the importance of sleep and circadian rhythms, as well as nutrition. So the key takeaways are really that the evidence is still evolving. We know that it's reversible. Having some awareness is important. We need to look at where to target interventions. And I would, again, come back to those three things: psychological safety, civility, and sleep. So we're talking about the 9 circles of hell. The problem is that suicide is huge. We lose on average 1 to 2 practitioners every week. Mental health issues are present throughout society, but they seem to affect the medical profession and the surgical profession disproportionately. We have a huge problem with SCARD, that's sleep and circadian rhythm disruption. And Russell Foster has written extensively on this. Night shift workers and shift workers really have disrupted sleep, which affects their metabolism, their health, psychology and mental well-being. Patient safety is a key problem, and if we haven't got good executive function, then patient safety suffers. There's a lack of adherence to guidelines and best practice. Workplace cultures are really toxic, and we know that interpersonal relationships have such an important effect and impact on how we perform and how we are able to sustain our careers. There are personal issues outside work that creep in, and of course this can ultimately lead to criminality. So these problems are what we face in reality. So we have to actually face the elephant in the room. I'm going to start off with a definition of burnout as given by Maslach. And burnout is really most commonly defined as a state of depersonalization, emotional exhaustion, and a sense of reduced personal accomplishment. And there are huge impacts both personally and on a professional side. So it affects relationships, it can cause financial problems, we have problems with substance abuse, and we know that there is a huge impact on suicide. If you are reported to the GMC, then there is a huge chance of mental health problems and suicide. But it also affects our professional life, so disengagement, problems with performance, turnover of staff, and patient safety. And I have to say that the patient safety is debatable, because is it that the person who's burnt out reports more patient safety issues, or is it that they are tired, fatigued, and cause more problems? And I think that can be debated. So my group did a review which is published looking at the factors associated with burnout, and Scharnefeld has done a lot of work, and we found that 54% of doctors are emotionally exhausted compared to 10 to 15% of the general population. 40% of NHS consultants are affected. But if you look at the junior staff, that is an increasing tidal wave of problems. And I don't think we can say this is because these people are less resilient. These are some of the highest resilience people that we have in our society. Surgeons score very highly for depersonalization at work, second only to microbiology in terms of depressive symptoms. And so these statistics are something that we need to reflect upon. 47 studies of 42,000 doctors who showed that burnt out doctors are twice as likely to be involved in patient safety incidents. And I talked about the chicken and egg situation with these. And they are three times more likely to have low patient satisfaction. So there is a big problem with burnout, and then therefore our delivery of service to patients. So we have to acknowledge it. So what are the factors that really associate? And they can be put down into certain groups. So the first group is the personal. Is there a good family support? Is the doctor suffering from a high debt load? Do they have extracurricular activities? And these are some basic things about living that we may sacrifice as part of our life in surgery. And then we go through the psychological factors and the importance of emotional grit. And we don't do much psychological or psychometric assessment when we get into the profession. This is coming on, but it needs to be really assessed to give us the support that we need. And then of course there's the workplace, the setting, what happens when there are errors, the workload and the work environment, and that's job satisfaction, aggressive patients, lack of administrative staff, lack of autonomy in what you do, and I'll talk about the 20% rule, lack of mentoring. Now all of these things are being addressed slowly, but in my view we need to put rocket boosters there to try and address it. Now I've shown this slide throughout COVID. It really shows the impact of COVID, because we all know the crisis back in 2020 of the first wave, that purple wave of the emergency, the medical emergency, and then we had the green wave that showed what happens when you restrict care and the impact on waiting lists, etc. And then there's a third blue wave, which is the interruption of care on chronic conditions. So we really have some significant healthcare system problems, but all the while there is that curve of the of the red issues that are affecting our staff. That's the mental illness, the psychic trauma, and the burnout. And we know that we've lost 45,000 nurses, for example, in the last year. And that lack of staffing, that lack of junior doctors, that early retirement of consultant staff is having a huge impact on those who are left behind. So the challenge of COVID is hit surgeons because they weren't of primary importance. You know, in a disaster, in an earthquake, in a fire, in a terrorist attack, you know, surgeons are needed, but we weren't the primary human resource. We were redeployed. That caused lots of anxiety. Work was disrupted both in terms of team, the technologies that we had to use, and the resources we were given. And that led to this backlog of surgery, and we are all suffering moral injury from some of the things we saw. These are things that go deeply against all that we believe. So we may have witnessed it, we may have been part of it, and these are really important issues to address. So let's talk about the why. It's about the intensity and the complexity of the workload, the demands growing, the mounting waiting lists, as I mentioned. But we have to look at the electronic patient record. Since that was introduced, that's caused a huge impact and burden of work on us because we're now always on. We have to make sure those results get sent out to the patients, and there can be a sense of taking your work back home continuously. There is organisational antipathy for the humans, and all the while you're working in departments under huge stress. As I said, it's brutal, and interpersonal relationships get frayed. And of course, you have to manage this all in the context of your personal life. So that's the why. Which groups are vulnerable? Well, GPs, psychiatrists, training years and foundations, I've mentioned that, but surgeons are particularly vulnerable because of the commitment, the self-sacrifice, the perfectionism that we all have. So if this is happening, then we need to spot it. And we see people all the time who are emotionally drained, they're fatigued at work, they're feeling unable to accomplish much, they don't enjoy working, not caring about their colleagues, they become callous and start blaming other people. And there's a dropout and attrition rate. And this all has a background on mental health issues, depression, suicidal ideation, and other mental health problems. So the immediate thing to do is to seek help, and that's really important. I can't stress highly enough how important it is to take time off, seek help, and see your general practitioner in occupational health. But there are resources around. Local resources can be signposted. Practitioner Health, run by Claire Gerarda, is an exceptional service. Surgeons are usually quite recalcitrant, don't want to get involved. But the thing about surgeons is once they do, they tend to have some very, very good outcomes. There are doctor support networks, the Royal College of Surgeons Confidential Support and Advice Service, and of course the Medical Benevolent Fund. But it's important that there is an immediate stop and seeking out help. So what about the strategies to mitigate all this? Well, we have to look at the system, the organisation, and what we do as individuals. To avoid burnout, it's about empowerment, I think. It's about how we enjoy our jobs. And, you know, in medical school, we were chosen as highly resilient, highly ambitious people that were conscientious. But we come into a system that's, you know, focused on measurements, on budgets, on complex financial incentives. And Don Berwick looked at this and said, really what we need to do is focus on quality, civility, and reject greed, which is important. So I'd like to bring in now, when we look at organizations, the concept of psychological safety and empowerment. And this is really important. It's about working in an environment that you can speak up. It's about behaviors and attitudes. And Chris Turner has done a lot of work on this. So if you go to the Civility Saves Lives website, you can see the impact of civility and psychological safety. And I'll come and just mention a little bit more about this. But what are these behaviors that we're talking about? We're talking about kindness, empathy, civility, and assertiveness. So if our setup is like a very precious vase, then the behaviors are the table that that vase sits on. So that's kindness, the empathy, the civility, and the assertiveness that we should show. But the table needs legs, and that's our attitudes. And this is all about trust, curiosity, respect, and humility. So let's go back to that civility issue. So if you witness civility, or if you are a recipient of that, you are 50% less likely to be helpful in the rest of the day. And anyone who witnesses that event, somebody being rude, uncivil to you, is less likely to be helpful. So civility spreads not just to the person who suffered some rudeness at work, it spreads to everyone, and the culture becomes toxic. So it's important to address this. And we know that there are several myths. There's the perfection myth, that if we try hard enough, we will not make errors. And Lucian Leake talked about, if we punish people if they make errors, the punishment myth, they will make fewer of them. And we know that this doesn't necessarily work. So employers have a responsibility, and some have taken on the role of putting on Schwartz rounds, which is reflective group practice, started by Ken Schwartz, who was an attorney who during his dying days found that the staff looking after him just lacked total empathy for the simple human things, the human touch. And it's an opportunity for awareness within the team, to build communication, to debrief in a sensitive manner, in a safe manner, and to really strengthen those team bonds. Mentorship is really important. And really it's about the organisation showing staff that they care about the people that are delivering care in such difficult situations. But it's also about how we grow as people and individuals. And we know that there's a 20% rule. Scharnefeld did a lot of work on this and showed that if physicians spend at least 20% of their professional effort focused on a dimension of work they find meaningful, they dramatically lower their risk of burnout. And I think that's really important. So it's important to grow within the workplace to develop your practice. But we come back to the individual. Now, I'm very much against blaming individuals. That's not what's at stake here. The organisation and system have to give us the environment to flourish, to work well, to live our best lives. But we have a responsibility too. And that's about having psychological awareness, about keeping ourselves fit and healthy, about what we eat, about what we consume, how we build our support networks, and how, really importantly, how we role model for others. That will actually be the virtuous part of this circle. And I can't stress the importance of sleep as part of this personal awareness. So we know that a typical surgeon, this work has been published recently, 98% of surgeons drink more than 4 cups of caffeine a day, 92.6% drink less than 2 litres of water a day, 74.7% of surgeons drink sugary carbonated drinks, 50.5% of surgeons skip their breakfast, and 47.4% skip their lunch. So that's a really, really unhealthy way of being. 47.2% of surgeons have less than 2 fruits per day, and as a colorectal surgeon, that is upsetting. So diet is important, movement is important, but I think one of the most important issues that we really don't know about is sleep. We get 2 lectures in our 5 years at medical school on sleep, and we know that sleep and circadian biology are really coming to the fore. We know that this is happening in every single industry, whether it's the military, office workers, safety critical industries. Sleep is key, and Parliament and legislators are looking at the impact of sleep and shift work. Russell Foster has written extensively on this, and I urge you to read that. But we know that sleep and circadian rhythm disruption, SCARD, affects mental illness, relationships, physical health. We know that 98,000 deaths result from medical error in a survey in the United States. And when you look at shift working patterns and how many hours people are working, if you're working 80 hours or more, you're 50% more likely to make an error. And 60.5% of respondents in that survey said that they had made an error. We know that after a shift, road traffic crashes or near misses occur in about 57% of doctors. So shift working and how you control your sleep has an important impact on burnout. So this is a very complex topic, as I said, and we can come back to this slide on resilience, and we know that these are the things to hit, but it is so difficult if the environment, the organisation, the system, and also some of the personal care that we take doesn't lend itself to that. So I'd like to finish by how we can undo the damage. And this was a very good paper about how we deal with the experience of work and the organisation of work, and how we build job satisfaction rather than job dissatisfaction, how we deal with burnout and alienation. So we've got to get rid of the negative responses. We've got to get through some of those issues on the left-hand side of the screen, looking at positivity, focusing on quality of care, and essentially having a mentorship program that will help protect our surgeons and staff. And in really important, in the workplace, it's a case of really promoting civility. So I mentioned the concept of coaching and mentorship. Certain associations are starting to really build on this program, and we know from work from Atul Gawande the importance of coaching and mentorship to help us navigate success through this very, very complex career. And I always talk about the story of Charles Plum, who was a US fighter pilot who essentially was fighting in the Vietnam War, was shot down after 76 raids, and he was taken prisoner of war, and essentially after the war, when he was released, he was in a restaurant, he met a stranger who happened to be the person who had packed his parachute. And psychologically, we need to have somebody packing our parachute, somebody getting our back. And this is on a physical level, on a mental level, emotional level, and a spiritual level. So that, we know on a spiritual level why we get up in the morning to go to work. On an emotional level, making sure that all our personal issues are sorted. Having good cognitive function, that means having some sleep, getting some physical exercise. These are some of the aspects that impact on our state of mind and burnout. So I'd like to finish by saying prevention is much better than cure. The evidence base is growing. There is a reversibility in this. We need to build up some awareness. We need to target our interventions, and really, really importantly, think about psychological safety, civility, sleep and diet. These are all big, big, big impacts. And we know that it is okay to be not okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Arulampalam, for that. And I also forgot to say in your introduction that you're actually in Poland and joining us. So I'm sure the attendees are really grateful. It really complemented Uttam's lecture, which was talking about the difference between stress and burnout and depression and how they interlinked. And he talked about the burnout matrix. which I have a question about, but I'm sure there's some other questions. And you focused on psychological safety and really about, as well as taking personal care, which we're all guilty of not doing. And this is cups of tea, by the way, not coffee, but being mindful of our sleep, our diet, exercise, but also the importance of the environment. And I'm aware that many colleagues are on strike today in England, and I'm sure that it's not just about pay, but it's the environment and feeling valued, and you've shown how that is so important. So if you move to the next slide, I'm going to open up. I'm conscious that we're almost at 6, but I don't want to give up the opportunity of asking the audience, who I'm grateful you stuck with us through the hour, any questions. So okay, so there's a question from one of the panelists, one of the attendees, and I suppose I might address it to Uttam first and then Tan. Please could you shed some light on imposter syndrome in relation to burnout? Interesting, two interesting concepts, and potentially how they link. Uttam or Tan, either of you can take that.
Uttam, do you want?
You're on mute, Uttam.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Right. There isn't direct relation which has been at least studied in a clear manner. But of course, I mean, what you have heard so far, that it does, the imposter phenomenon does precipitate the burnout, and it is a kind of vicious circle. So in the current situation and in the current context, what I can say is that if you're thinking about how to manage burnout, if someone is suffering, one just need to find out how far, first, if there is this imposter phenomenon about the performance, and if it is contributing, and if it is, then it need to be addressed in its own way. So this is a kind of, I know it's short answer, but considering the time we have, I will limit my answer to this.
Tan, any thoughts on imposter syndrome? If it exists, does it exist? I think I have it, but you.
Yeah, I think you just said it. I've spent my whole career with incredible confidence, and then you sink to those times when you think, gosh, is this really me? When I became a consultant, you never feel ready to take it on. So I think imposter syndrome is something that all surgeons feel with. We're burdened with what why do people come and see a doctor? They come and see them because of pain and fear. That's the only two things. But when they come to see a surgeon, they come with pain and fear, and they give you all their trust to do things that are, it's quite strange cutting somebody open. So I think it's an enormous responsibility, and that weighs on you. I don't know, like as Uttam said, I am unaware of a link.
Okay, thank you. There's another question coming in about on calls and being on call, and I think if I paraphrase it, it's how much does doing on call, excessive on call, lead to burnout and also errors, I guess. Any thoughts on that, Tan?
Yes, I mean, there's really good evidence that SCARD, sleep and circadian rhythm disruption for night shift workers can increase medical error. It can cause problems if it's a continuous issue. So you have metabolic problems, you have problems with concentration, and as well as mental well-being. So night shift working is difficult but necessary, so we have to work out how we do that. Certainly the hours of work are important, and the slide that I showed suggests that if you're doing this work which can induce fatigue, cause micro sleeps, you're at danger not only at work from a medical error, but of course crashing your car going home in the morning from a night shift. And there are 300 deaths from road traffic crashes from these micro sleeps. So that's one issue. I think excessive workload, as Uttam quite rightly pointed out, is an important issue, and I think we tend to take on more work. You know, I've been guilty of this all my career. You take on work and then you run into a brick wall and you go in these cycles, and it's not helpful. So it's about managing that work and not trying to boil the ocean, but doing it collaboratively with your colleagues so that you're not, you know, you're all sharing the burden of the department. So you're all going together, forward together.
Thanks, Tan. And of course, people are more and more aware of the fact that you do need breaks, regular breaks, even if it's shift work. And I'm conscious that as hospitals moved away from on-call rotas, rooms were removed, and there's some sort of there is a trend to try and improve that, but it could be much better, absolutely. So any further questions from colleagues in the audience? If not, I've got one for Uttam, probably Tan as well. You talk about recharging batteries, and I absolutely understand it. You cannot go run on empty, although most of us seem to try to do that. How does one recharge their batteries? And I'm asking for myself and hopefully colleagues in the audience, when you are just physically exhausted and the last thing you can want to do is go for a walk, or you might know that's a good thing. In fact, it might not even be on your radar because you're so exhausted. So what's your answer? What's your thoughts on that?
So the first thing is that, of course, it is going to be incremental. So reduce the time of work and just find out at least half an hour for something. I mean, 15 to 30 minutes. So try increasing that, try reducing. One of the other aspects is that the active recharge doesn't have to be out of work. It can be in the workplace itself. Just like what we said is that taking break. During the break, you can extend the break and just do something recharge. It's just even listening to music, or if you just want to go on, on your phone or something like that to recharge, getting some information, it will help. So try to increase. What I have observed is just being aware of this concept and applying it in a very small measure does help wonders. So, and then once you know about it, then you start increasing the time. But yes, I mean, it won't happen. Like suppose, for example, you are feeling exhausted, or you won't go and start jogging next day. No, it is going to be very, very incremental. If at all, your ideal sort of your goal is to start jogging, you need to have at least 4 to 6 weeks period to achieve that. At least you can start jogging.
Well, when I take up jogging, which will be the first of never probably, but it's nice to know that doing things almost passively, as long as you have a break and take things. And I realize that some people on the call will think, a lot of these things are beyond my control. A lot of us, you're in training and it's very difficult. So it's important to have those supports within the within your work family, as I call it, as well as at home and outside, and don't forget those supports. And if you do encounter any issues, please turn for help to somebody for help. That might be an individual, it might be a resource. We've got our confidential helpline. There's lots of other resources that Tan mentioned, and even you can reach out to me after the event, when it closes, via the team. So call for help, because you're not alone. Anything that you guys potentially may be going through or have seen, you may want to guide your colleagues to areas of support. If you're in training, there's usually a professional support unit in each deanery, because depending on what your any stress or difficulties you're having, we can help you navigate or signpost to different areas of support. And mentoring is one of the things college is taking forward amongst a whole host of other agendas. So if that is the final question, it just remains for me to thank Professor Arulampalam and Mr. Shiralkar for 2 great talks, and really I've learnt loads, and thank you to all colleagues on the call, wherever you are. If you're striking, I hope you had a productive day. If you were covering, I hope you've had a productive day, and enjoy the rest of your evening doing something that recharges you. So good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.